Hello, I wanted to say a few words about this MIDI encoder which I designed a couple of years ago. It has 96 digital inputs, so 48 along that side and 48 along there, which you can assign to various purposes. They can be keyboards, they can be pedal board inputs, they can be stop inputs, pistons, really any digital input that you have on an organ. If you look along the side of the pins here, you can see the notes that would be assigned to each pin if you're using a manual. You can actually assign a manual and a pedal board at the same time because there are enough inputs to do that. And if I tilt the board up a little, then you can see here you've got the notes that would be assigned to a pedal board, all the way from C2 there all the way up to top G. The dip switches here are used to select exactly what you're doing. So the first four are to choose which MIDI channel you want. The next two specify whether it's a manual, whether it's a manual plus a pedal board, whether it stops. And the last two here are to turn on analog inputs for swell pedals, two swell pedals which you would connect to this connector here. Something that is unique about it, or I think very, very nearly unique compared to other MIDI encoders out there, is that the output is USB, MIDI over USB, and therefore you can connect it straight to your computer. You don't need to have a third-party MIDI to USB converter, which takes up space, adds some latency, costs a bit of money, and is a single point of failure. Another thing that I should just point out is that depending on your inputs might switch to earth or they might switch to positive. Both are found. Rather than needing to choose when you order the board which one you want, you actually can just use this jumper here to switch between negative switching and positive switching. Just move the jumper from one side to the other. If you're interested in knowing a little bit about how this works internally, let me point out that it's actually designed as two sides. There's a computer side and an organ side. The two sides are very largely independent of each other, and the only connection between them is an optical connection. This chip here is actually an optocoupler. There's a couple of advantages to this. One advantage is that the ground potential of the organ and the ground potential of the computer do not have to be the same. And a further advantage, if you're using some of the older stops as your digital input, so here we are with a Compton console. These are stops that are approaching 90 years old now. They weren't really designed for microelectronics, and they can be a little bit temperamental if you regulate the input down to 5 volts and then feed just a very few milliamps through them. So you've got the organ side here. The whole thing runs at the console potential, which in my case here is 18 volts, and it will put about 25 milliamps through each switch, which is it's known as a wetting current, sufficient current to knock any tarnish off the copper contacts, and 25 milliamps is not a million miles from what the stop units would have expected when they were new. So this board, it's been around for a couple of years now. It's well proven. It's earned its keep. But there's something else I've done with it just recently, which is driving stops with it. If you look over here, you can see that there's a little auxiliary input which I've not used before, and I'm using that with modified software to drive the powered stop units. So if I bring you over here, you can see that I've got one of these working as the input for the upper row of stops on my console, and then the auxiliary connector here goes to a driver card, and then that goes over to a further driver card which powers the right hand side of the sweep. So what do you require from this? Well, what you need more than anything else is that every time you move a stop by hand, a message will go from the organ via USB into the computer, and every time a stop is moved under a powered control, whether it's from a piston or whether it's on the screen, then you need a message to go from the computer to the organ, whereupon the appropriate stop magnet will turn on. So let's try the first of those first. Let us try, here we are, the Corny Dot. This is actually the Warrington Cavalier Cole sample set, which I think is fantastic. So here you are, pedal Corny Dolce 4 foot. If I move it like so, there we are, and when I move it either on or off, you can see the red LED is flashing to say that you've got a message going from the organ to the computer. What about the other way around? Well, that's what happens if I move the stop by hand. If I move it on the screen using my mouse, like so, then the yellow LED will flash to tell you that a message is going from the computer to the organ. So I do that, LED flashes, and the stop moves like so. And that applies right across the whole sweep. It can scale up across the whole instrument. Your next question is, how long is the magnet energized for? How long is it strobed for? There are some of these products that will strobe for 150 milliseconds, 250 milliseconds. I think there's at least one out there where you can select between those two options. Well, the answer with this one is that it'll strobe the magnet for as long as it needs. It's got a feedback loop in there which says that once the switch has changed state, it cuts the current off. Doesn't cut it off immediately, it cuts it off after an extra few milliseconds. So the stop is being pulled against its buffer just for a few milliseconds more, and that takes away any tendency for the stop to bounce back after you've moved it under organ control. Okay? And the last element of this, what happens if you energize a magnet, and bearing in mind that these magnets are 90 years old, what happens if you energize the magnet and the stop doesn't move? Well, it's certainly not going to move with a pencil in the way. And what happens is it energizes the magnet for a maximum of 500 milliseconds. And then it gives up, it says it's not going to work, something's gone wrong, and then it moves the virtual stop on the screen back to where it was before. So let's have a go at that. So here we are up on the screen. I've locked the stop in place. So if I now try to move it under magnet control, I'll have the 500 milliseconds, and then it'll move it back, like so. Okay, you can even hear the magnet actually trying to work. And if you look on the board, where do the messages go? Well, you have an amber LED to say that there's a message from the computer to the organ, and then 500 milliseconds later, you've got a message going back from the organ to the computer to put the virtual stop back where it was before, like so. So amber and then red. Okay. So you've got a nice system there. It's got all the logic that you need, and I've got a question for you at the same time. I'm very happy with the way the logic in this works. As far as I'm concerned, this is exactly what you need from a stop driving system for help work. You can move the stops by hand, you can move the stops under organ control. You've got a feedback loop which powers the stop for as long as it needs, and also you've got a system that puts the virtual stop back where it came from if the real stop fails to move. But my question for you is, how should this be spread out between printed circuit boards? Simply because I have the boards, the physical boards here already, I've split this up with one input board and then driving two output boards. That's perfectly satisfactory for me. I'm not going to change that system here. It occurs to me that you might prefer to have a single board which has got the whole thing integrated. So you'd have something that is probably about half as long again as this, and the right hand 2/3 would be the outputs, and then the left hand third would be a number of inputs. It might be nicer to have an integrated board, or it might not matter. You might be perfectly happy with it spread between an input board and an output board like you see here. So if you have any thoughts on the matter, let me know. I'd be interested to hear from you, and thank you very much for watching.